Very good. Thanks so much, Minister. Welcome, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to open up this morning's event. I have the great pleasure of introducing Minister Bains, who I think everyone will know. However, of course, Minister Bains is our Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, formerly Innovation, Science and Economic Development. So in our capacity here at Bayview Yards, we certainly see the power and the deliberate action that the Minister has taken over years, and we're very grateful for those directions. We see it and we feel it in our community. So Minister, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Prior to the Minister's work in government, he of course was a distinguished lecturer at Ryerson's Ted Rogers School, and also worked at the Ford Motor Company.
That's right.
The Minister has been recognized for his work in diversity, and of course that's perfect for today's discussion. And so with that, Minister, I'll pass the floor to you.
Merci beaucoup, Michael, pour votre hospitalité et pour votre leadership aussi. C'est un honneur et un privilège pour moi d'être ici avec mes collègues. I would also like to acknowledge my good friend Greg Fergus, who we started our journey together in 2015 in this portfolio, and so I was telling him how special it is to have him here in his capacity as the Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board and Digital Services. And with us, we also have Wendy Souquier, who is someone I worked very closely with at Ryerson University, at Ryerson's Diversity Institute, and she does tremendous work in that academic environment. And we have Joanne Stanley, the Executive Director of Women in Communications and Technology, with us as well. Rahul Bardwaj from the Institute of Corporate Directors is joined us as well, and Tabitha Bull from the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. So we have an incredible group of panel members with us today and part of this announcement. But je voudrais commencer par reconnaître que la terre sur laquelle nous nous rassemblons est le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple Algonquin Anishinaabe. And it's important that we recognize the traditional territory that we sit on. And I think for this morning's conversation, I would like to set the broader context. And I want to make it abundantly clear that the existence of systemic discrimination is not up for debate. It's no longer an issue that we want to talk about if it exists or not. It's a fact. It's an unfortunate reality, but it is a reality. And we, as individuals and as a collective, recognize that the status quo is neither sustainable nor beneficial for Canada. And I firmly believe that improving inclusion and diversity at senior levels in corporate Canada will create a competitive advantage, will enable us to succeed going forward if we truly leverage our talent. And business leadership in Canada should reflect all the voices that help shape Canada. That is the ultimate goal. That is the desired outcome. And the fundamental problem that we see today is that women, racialized persons, those who identify themselves as LGBTQ2S, people living with disabilities, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people are underrepresented in our institutions and our leadership positions. And organizations are missing out from those unique perspectives, those unique and diverse opinions and thoughts and ideas. So that's why we're launching the 50-30 Challenge today. This was co-created with private sector partners, diversity advocates and experts, individuals who are passionate about this subject matter. And this is fundamentally about improving equity in organizations across the country. As you know from the fall economic statement, we allocated $33 million over the next 3 years to provide resources for organizations so they can have the tools, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, so that they're able to promote diversity within their organization. We've also want to announce the fact that Standards Council of Canada, which is internationally recognized accreditation body, will create a certification program And that's exciting because when people take on this 50-30 challenge, we want a third-party validator that can say, look, this organization has achieved this incredible milestone. And what is this milestone? It's very easy to understand. The 50 represents the fact that we want to see gender parity in senior management and at the board level. And 30 represents underrepresented groups. We want to see that reflected again in our leadership at the board level and in senior management. So we're really excited about this 50-30 challenge today. And this all started a few months ago when we started to socialize this idea and this challenge. We engaged many organizations to get their feedback and perspective with co-creators, as I mentioned, in mid-October. And since then and up until now, and of course today we're launching this challenge, over 500 organizations have signed up across the country. It's incredible to see the level of excitement and momentum. For example, organizations like Siemens, KPMG, Lockheed Martin, the University of Alberta, IWK Health Centre, and the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, just to name a few, just reflecting the type of organizations that believe in this 50-30 challenge. And as I said, this is a joint effort between businesses and diversity advocates. So I look forward to our conversation today, and I want to start off by asking a very important question because we shouldn't take it for granted. And that is, how does diverse leadership benefit an organization? I mean, we talk about diversity. We know diversity is good, but how does it benefit an organization? And what are the tangible, positive outcomes of improving diversity at a high level? And maybe we'll start off with you, Wendy.
Thanks so much, Minister Bains. It's really a thrill to be here. I teach at the Ted Rogers Business School, and so while I believe that commitments to diversity and inclusion are grounded in fundamental commitments to human rights, I also think there's a very strong business case. And the research shows very clearly, for example, that organizations that have diversity in leadership are able to better engage diverse employees, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. And organizations which demonstrate their commitments to diversity through diverse leadership obviously inspire employees, and there are links to better engagement, and more engaged employees are better performers. In a city like Toronto, half of the population is born outside the country. Half of the population is racialized. Those are massive markets, and they're growing. Companies that have diverse leadership are better able to understand the opportunities in diverse markets, globalization, they're more likely to export, and so on. We also see benefits in terms of innovation, Minister, and I know that the research from organizations like Xerox, for instance, show very clearly that more diverse teams, more creative, more innovative, and design better products. And there's also simply the issue of risk avoidance. And frankly, if you get this wrong, it can destroy the reputation and brand of very well-established organizations. So I think the business case shouldn't be overstated, but I think it's there and the research shows it.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy, and I think you put forward very compelling, tangible examples of how diversity can improve the bottom line and how it's not only the right thing to do, but it improves productivity and profitability. We've even heard from the McKinsey report that was issued a few years ago that says organizations that truly embrace diversity at all levels, but particularly at a leadership level, are likely to have 8 times more return on their investments and have a significantly greater uptake on their productivity as well. So I guess that question is something that I know that Rahul, you're often asked about, and I know you're doing a lot of work in this area. So can you speak to that as well?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for inviting me this morning, Minister. And I'd like to amplify some of Wendy's comments because I'm very, very firmly aligned with those. This is one of those moments where what's good for business and what's good for society align with each other. And that's great to be able to push that across the finish line here. And what I'm trying to say here is really that customers, employees, and society, they're seeing equitable reflection on boards and management as a table stakes. Everybody's expecting that now. But as you noted as well, CPPIB is one of the signatories to the challenge. So we're seeing more on the institutional investor side and the proxy advisors, and they want to see diversity on boards and in senior management as well. And they're doing that because they see it enhances performance, you've heard it drives innovation, decreases risk in decision-making, and that's a very potential potent combination there between those. So when it's good for business, good for society, you're getting a win-win, and we're seeing some real momentum in that space.
And Rahul, you and I have talked about this issue at length, and you talk about a global ambition that you have for Canada. You talk about the fact that if we truly leverage our unique value proposition, which is our rich diversity, that we can take this governance issue around diversity at board levels and become global leaders. Can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I've often said that it's time to make corporate governance Canada's global competitive advantage. And at the very heart of that is trust. It's trust in our institutions, it's trust in our culture, and it's our ability to go around the world and to say that when you want to look at a place to invest your future and your family, you can look at Canada because we've got a culture of governance that respects things like diversity and performance, and we're open to that. And when you're thinking about placing your capital in places where you can also trust that there's a culture of good governance around that, you can look at Canada as well. So it's not only important for us today, for Canadian institutions to embrace progressive corporate governance, it's important as a competitive advantage globally at a time when trust is at an all-time low.
No, I think that level of ambition is what we need, particularly as we're dealing with the economic fallout of COVID-19, and we're thinking through of what kind of recovery we want to have. We want to be able to highlight the areas where Canada can truly differentiate itself. And I think your vision and passion towards that, Rahul, is greatly appreciated. So we're excited that you're part of this 50-30 challenge, and I want to thank you for your leadership as well on this issue. If I may pivot now a little bit towards not only the tangible outcomes and the benefits, but the barriers. There are barriers in the hiring people of diverse backgrounds. It's just a harsh reality. We talked about at the beginning the fact that we're dealing with issues around systemic discrimination. It's not something that we should debate, but we should understand, acknowledge, and accept, as I said, it has a harsh reality, but also identify what those pain points are, what are those barriers. And in particular, because we're in this unique position, so Greg, I'm going to be focusing you on this at the beginning, how can government help eliminate those barriers? So qu'est-ce que vous pensez à votre opinion, à votre expérience, qu'est-ce que vous pensez?
Mais merci beaucoup, Monsieur le ministre, puis je suis d'accord avec vous. Le gouvernement a un rôle essentiel dans tout ça. Et je pense qu'une des raisons, une des façons qu'on peut le faire, c'est comme des initiatives comme l'initiative 50-30. Effectivement, si on veut résoudre un problème, il faut le reconnaître en premier. Et pour reconnaître qu'il y avait des barrières formelles, il y avait des barrières informelles qui existaient pendant longtemps. On a vu ça avec, tout d'abord, juste avoir le titre à votre propriété ou votre terrain, votre immeuble. Pour longtemps, quand je considère comme la communauté noire au Canada, on a vu à plusieurs reprises, jusqu'aux années 60, la grande difficulté que les Noirs avaient pour avoir dans leur possession leur titre de propriété ou de leur hypothèque pour leur maison. Et sans avoir ce titre-là, ils ne pouvaient pas chercher une autre hypothèque pour améliorer leur maison, pour faire des rénovations ou peut-être pour léguer ça à leurs enfants. Et si on ne crée pas cette opportunité d'avoir une richesse intergénérationnelle, mais ça va continuer, ça va perdurer le problème qu'on va avoir avec de créer des opportunités pour des gens, des personnes racisées. Alors, c'est très important que le gouvernement joue son rôle et que le secteur privé joue son rôle, que toute la communauté joue son rôle. Puis je pense que je suis très optimiste quand j'entends qu'après juste quelques semaines, plus de 500 compagnies, sociétés privées se sont engagées avec le gouvernement canadien pour dire, pour une fois pour toutes, on va vraiment régler ce problème-là. Et deuxièmement, comme vos deux autres invités, Mme Sucure, M. Rahal a dit, non seulement que c'est la bonne chose à faire, c'est la chose le plus rentable à faire aussi. Parce qu'on va avoir des compagnies qui sont plus aptes, plus résilientes, plus durables, plus profitables, en se faisant de chercher la diversité. Et je suis très, très, très optimiste parce qu'il y a 40 ans, le Canada a commencé à engager cette question-là avec le rôle des femmes dans la haute gestion de nos compagnies ou de nos gouvernements. Puis on a fait beaucoup de progrès. Et puis le Canada est un meilleur pays à cause de l'égalité des femmes dans ces domaines-là. Alors moi, je suis très confiant qu'on va encore une fois être un leader sur la question de l'intégration des gens racisés, des Noirs, des Autochtones, ainsi de suite, dans les postes de leadership dans n'importe quelle communauté, dans n'importe quelle entreprise.
Non, merci beaucoup, Greg. Vous avez raison. Nous avons fait beaucoup de progrès, mais nous devons continuer à travailler fort aussi. Et je suis optimiste aussi. Mais merci pour votre travail et votre leadership. C'est incroyable. C'est absolument essentiel et c'est incroyable. And so if I can, Tabitha, also engage you on this aspect, because I know, and I was reading the Globe and Mail piece as well, in terms of the work that you've been doing in this area, in addressing some of those barriers from your perspective that you see in hiring people of diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds. And again, the role of government, as Greg mentioned, we just started this conversation around 50-30 challenge, and using the government as a platform, we're seeing so much momentum. I hear from businesses, if the government is taking this seriously, then we better step up. Not only do they see themselves wanting to engage, but they know that if they can engage with the government, and we can talk a little bit about the benefits, because this 50-30 challenge is designed in a way not only to identify organizations that are promoting diversity, but if they achieve this goal, the next step is to make sure that they get better access to government programs, that they're able to do business with the Government of Canada and get preferential access because of the fact that they're committed to diversity. And so businesses see this, again, not only as the right thing to do, but it makes economic sense as well. So Tabitha, can you speak to this issue from your perspective?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me and for the land acknowledgement. Yeah, I think there's, apologies, my French is not very good, so if I repeat.
No, it's absolutely, no, it's all good, it's all good.
I think there's a few things too. I mean, there's definitely an unconscious bias that exists in hiring practices. And I think organizations and people in hiring roles really need to consider how they make their interview practices both a safe space for the interviewees to be able to participate and bring their inclusive and whole self to an interview, but also as an interviewee, what are the questions that I'm asking? How am I going to potentially evaluate that individual based on, you know, we shouldn't ask questions like, what's the book you're reading? Because if they're reading a book about a political person that I might not like, that might increase or change my opinion of that person, which isn't reflective of the work that they're going to be able to do. I think another thing that is so important is the networks. So both the network in just getting that first job, so the people that you know and how we open those networks into more diverse cultures. But then also once you're in that organization, how do we ensure that the social interactions are inclusive of people in underrepresented organizations or women? So as a female engineer, I started my career in engineering consulting, and I didn't play on the hockey team with the other male partners. I didn't get invited to the Leafs games. And that really hampered my ability to be able to move up within that organization and within the sector. So I think we really have to ensure that our networks that we're creating within an organization are also inclusive. And then I think this this point that you raise about how important it is that the government's leading this, that we're really having these discussions. Just having that discussion and doing this education is really the most important piece of this. To be able to have leaders who maybe really want to grow that inclusive space within their organization, turn to other leaders who have been able to do it. So how are we demonstrating that this is a possibility and that there are benefits and that we can ensure that those people are able to share those stories? But then there are many, many people who are doing this because it's the right thing to do, but there are still many leaders who need to see where it's going to benefit their business. And I think that portion of prioritizing these organizations who meet the challenge to get work with the government is going to be a key factor as well. So I think that's an important point of this program.
No, thank you very much, Tabitha. And I think you raised some incredibly important points that I've experienced as well growing up and joining organizations and trying to fit into the culture. I think that's the point when you talk about the biases, about the example you gave about the book, for example, or the types of questions, or the hockey analogy. It really the culture. And what we're trying to do with this is actually change the culture of organizations, where they embrace diversity and inclusion, and that's part of their DNA. That's what we want to see within organizations, and that's what we want to see within government as well. And the network example that you use is one that I've been often reminded of. It's not sometimes what you know, but who you know.
That's right.
And that is a harsh reality. And I think, it's easy for people to think or be able to navigate within their network, groupthink. These are challenges that have led to traditional hiring practices at senior management level and at the board level, and we got to break that mold a bit. And speaking about that journey, Michael, I know you and I were talking about this earlier this morning. So can you talk about your diversity journey and some of the barriers that exist and what you're trying to do to address those barriers?
Yes, thank you, Minister. We started our journey about 3 years ago, and it was at a time when it became very obvious to us as a company that we were not providing the right services and support to women-owned businesses. And so that was the start of our journey from a diversity perspective. We got to a place where we realized we were eliminating half the market, like by just not addressing and making our environment here warm and welcoming to women to be able to actually build their businesses, including the coaches and mentors that were there to help support. At that time, we had 10% women as coaches, mentors. Now we're almost 50. We're very, very close. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. Our accelerator looked like a locker room 3 years ago. It does not look like that now. And because we deliberately took the action to make those changes. I think that talk can be cheap. I think you can get into events and activities. You actually have to work with your deliberate actions and your intentions to be able to make the changes that are necessary. We've recently hired a person to help us to look around corners as we try to address the broader question of diversity. So we now have a diversity, inclusion, and belongingness lead. I believe that she will help us very, very directly to make sure that our programming is welcoming to people of all walks of life. But I do want to come back to some of the earlier statements. I think the 50-30 challenge is extremely important because it does attack things at a governance level. If you don't change it at the leadership level, you're going to have a very hard time making substantive change that is lasting. Because I would say for everybody that is watching, if you don't have a long-term view of this, and you look at this as being something where you take a couple of actions, you declare victory, you're totally missing what's going on here. You really, really have to look much further out to make the kind of substantive change and the systemic change that is necessary to include everyone. Everyone has potential, and this is an opportunity for us to make that happen.
No, you are so eloquent in your response, Michael, and I totally agree with you. It truly is a leadership issue, and for you to acknowledge that and then also bring in people to look at the blind spots, as you said, is important. And it's an acknowledgement that we don't have all the answers. And again, it just speaks to the understanding that it's a continuous journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's a journey that we're on. And that's why we've allocated the $33 million to organizations, is because this 50-30 challenge is a journey as well. many companies want to aspire to get there. Some are very close to that target, and some will achieve it in the near future. But we want to make sure that people are supported along the journey and they have the resources. So you bringing in someone to do the assessments, to look at the blind spots, are the kinds of resources and tools we want to provide, particularly to the smaller and medium-sized organizations that necessarily don't have those resources, but are committed to this issue and understand both from a moral perspective, but economic perspective as well, the benefits. And speaking about barriers and opportunities, according to the Ryerson Diversity Institute, so Wendy, I'm making this plug, if women were enabled to fully participate in the economy, they would add $150 billion to our GDP by 2026. So just think about that. We're talking about an economic recovery going forward, and the opportunities are in the billions of dollars if we can eliminate those barriers and make sure there's full participation of women in the labor market. So, Joanne, I want to speak to you about this because in your capacity as the Executive Director of Women in Communications and Technology, this is an issue I know that you've encountered. These barriers do exist, and I would love to get your perspective on what you think governments can do and what some of those barriers are.
Thank you, Minister. And you're right. In my role as Executive Director for Women in Communications and Technology, we are an association that for 29 years has been working to advance and promote, encourage women into leadership. And that's a really critical point that you make. And it is about leadership and that it starts at the top. I'm pleased that you have used the title 50-30, that you've set targets because that's one of the critical areas for companies and for leaders to identify where they stand in terms of the number of women and diverse leaders that they have, and setting goals and targets to exceed 50%. Research has shown that that is a magic number, at least as it relates to women in leadership, that companies, we've talked about the business case, but there's been a lot of research that says that companies have more than 50% women in senior management positions, outperform, are better managed, are more financially successful than companies that don't. In Canada, it's sad to say that we do an analysis every year called Up in Numbers, and the number of women in senior positions in what we call the digital industries, technology, digital media, broadcast communications, is between 17 and 18%. That's a far cry from the 50% that you need to be more successful. So not only is the business case there and has been proven for a number of years, but it's good for the company. We've used the phrase, if you can see her, you can be her. And that's an important element of what we do in an association, is to showcase successful women and men who are supportive of women, men who, what we call our male allies, who will advance women in their organization. So there are a few tips that I will just share with you in terms of changing those numbers, appointing more women to board positions. Excuse me, I'm just going to take some water here.
No worries.
That's a very critical step. Second is to establish a training program to combat issues and biases, to create a culture of accountability, to listen to women and peoples of minorities and from different races and from different cultures, to listen to their perspective, to create allies, particularly male allies. These are a few of the tactics, the things that a company can do to improve their number and to meet your 50/30 challenge?
Well, thank you very much, Joanne, for your leadership in this area. And I totally agree with you in terms of the importance of setting goals and making it very clear that the government is there to work with the private sector. Recently, we just introduced legislation, C-25, which is about comply and explain measures for organizations under the CBCA to make it very clear that they should have diversity policies. And they should disclose those diversity policies to their shareholders. And failure to do so, they should explain why they don't have a diversity policy. And that came into effect this year. And so that's put pressure on organizations to step up in this area, particularly, again, at the board level, but also the senior management level. These are two areas that I wanted to highlight. And where some of the early numbers indicate that we've made some progress. And so I want to highlight that we are actually moving the needle. We are actually making progress. Currently, 21 to 24%, that's the early range of women in board positions in corporate Canada. Visible minorities, 5%. Indigenous population in our Indigenous leadership, less than 1%. Less than 1% for a Black population as well. Persons with disability, 0.03%. So clearly, we have some work to do, and that's why we're doing the 50/30 challenge today. And that's why we're so excited about the government stepping up in this area. It's about embracing diversity because we fundamentally believe that corporate Canada should look like Canada. That's what we want to see. That's the desired outcome. And as Rahul said, this is our diversity advantage. This is our competitive advantage. This will enable us to succeed globally as well. And this is about promoting diversity and inclusion in corporate Canada. And we're very excited to launch this 50/30 challenge today. So I want to thank the panel members for joining us. I want to thank Michael and Greg here joining me physically. And with that, I want to turn it over to my team. John, if there's anything else to add before we conclude? Okay, wonderful. So over to you, Michael.
So we can now take a few questions. I think we have a few moments for questions for any of the panelists that will remain with us, and of course those on stage.
Thank you. Nancy?
Oh.
Please press star one at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile maintenant pour poser une question. The first question is from Monica Walsh from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Hi, Minister. Thank you so much for taking our questions today. The Globe reported this week that Nuvax has more vaccine manufacturing capacity than the NRC facility when it will ultimately be ready sometime next year. Is the government reviewing whether it should be relying on Nuvax for vaccine manufacturing to speed the process up?
Well, thank you very much for your question. And I think it's important to know that we're very proud of the work that we've done to make significant investments in procurement. We have one of the most diverse portfolios when it comes to vaccines. But we acknowledge we need to also build up domestic biomanufacturing capacity as well in the short term and also in the long term. There's a clear recognition in this pandemic, resiliency and self-sufficiency is important. And what we've done in order to address these issues is engage experts and scientists. And the Vaccine Task Force has looked at this issue. They've made recommendations of investments in Medicago, for example, in Quebec City of $173 million that we've invested in. The National Research Council, as you alluded to, $170 million that we invested to build up capacity there. And Vito Intervac from Saskatoon is another facility where we've made significant investments to build up our domestic capacity. And the point I'm making is that these decisions are based on the recommendations by the experts and the scientists, and we're following through on those recommendations.
Right, but that doesn't answer my question at all about whether the government for the short term is looking or reviewing whether Nuvax could play a role. Throughout the spring and the summer, you made a big point of saying that vaccine manufacturing domestically has to be a part of the COVID response. This wasn't just talking about the long-term planning for the country's biomanufacturing. So again, are you reconsidering or looking at the offer from Nuvax to be producing vaccines for the COVID-19 virus this year?
So Nuvax has engaged with the vaccine task force. The vaccine task force makes recommendations to us, so they evaluate these proposals. They look at the facilities, they look at the financials, they look at the science, they look at the data, and based on that, based on the recommendations by the vaccine task force, we will proceed. So Nuvax has engaged with the vaccine task force, but we want to make sure that these investments provide the best possible outcomes for Canadians. So your assessment is correct that Nuvax has engaged with the task force, but we haven't received a recommendation to proceed with this because we had recommendations on other investments, like I indicated, on Medicago, on the NRC facility, and Vito Intervac.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The next question is from Justin Lang, freelance. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Good morning, Minister. I'm actually following up on exactly the same question. As I'm sure you're well aware, we're looking in this country for a facility to produce the AstraZeneca vaccine. The Medicago facility will be producing their own candidate. The facility in Saskatchewan will be producing a different candidate. What led you to the decision that building a whole new facility at the NRC was the fastest, most efficient, and best way to get ready to produce this AstraZeneca vaccine? And was there any second guessing of that decision when you realized the delays would stretch well into 2021?
So thank you very much, Justin, for your question. And as you've indicated, we want to build up our domestic biomanufacturing capability here within Canada. We engage with the vaccine task force. That's why we set up this task force, which represents experts and scientists to evaluate the different proposals and initiatives. And based on the recommendations, we proceeded with the investment in the National Research Council facility in Royalmount. We believe that this is an important step. As you've indicated, there are different vaccine platforms and viral vectors, RNAs, for example. And so earlier on, we didn't know which particular vaccine candidate was going to succeed, but it was important that we were very aggressive with our procurement strategy in order to identify those internationally promising vaccine candidates. And I think Canadians can be rest assured that our strategy is working and we're getting vaccines out to Canadians and make sure that they have access to safe and effective vaccines, including Pfizer, as you know, which was just approved by Health Canada.
Okay, Minister, that didn't address what I was asking you. If I can just reiterate, why was there no effort to look for existing industry to produce the AstraZeneca vaccine? Why did you not go with an existing facility that already had the reactors in place, already had the building in place? What advice were you given that building a whole new structure was the fastest and most efficient and cost-effective way to get capacity in place to produce this AstraZeneca vaccine?
Yeah, so Justin, I just want to make it very clear that I disagree with the premise that we didn't evaluate these proposals. We looked at Nuvax. I want to make it abundantly clear that the vaccine task force looked at the range of options across the country, all the current facilities that we have, and the possibility of new investments. And all of those were evaluated by the vaccine task force, which made recommendations to us. And based on those recommendations, we made investments, and significant investments. So I think it's important for Canadians to note that Medicago is a $173 million investment. The NRC investment is $170 million, $56 million for Vito Intervac, and Abcelera was another, it's not a vaccine, but it's a therapeutic, and now that company is poised to be the largest Canadian biotech company in Canada based on the IPO. So we made these investments based on the advice of the vaccine task forces, and Nuvax was considered as part of that equation. And so that's the process that we've taken, and we have deployed significant financial resources to build up that domestic capacity. But remember, these are complex facilities that will take time, not many, many months to build. They have to be up to GMP standards, and that is why we're very thoughtful about the investments that we're making.
Thank you. Merci. There are no further questions. Just at this time, nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Over to you, Michael.
With that, I do want to thank you, Minister Bains, for your leadership in making this challenge and launching this challenge today. Thank you so much. To our panelists, wonderful comments today. I can tell you I take away a lot of very strong insights that we'll incorporate into our little company. And I do want to encourage accelerators and economic development agencies across Canada. You've got an obligation here. You should be leaned in and signed up. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and we'll bring this event to a close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.